This is a quick review of all of the tenses that we've learned in Spanish and how they all fit together.
The first timeline explains the tenses of the indicative, which is used to talk about things in real life. The last item on the timeline is the pluperfect. The pluperfect expresses things that had happened, usually before something else. In Spanish, it's the verb haber conjugated in the imperfect tense with the past participle, like había pasado. Next we have the imperfect, which is used to express something that used to happen or was happening. For example, pasaba. Then we have the preterite. The preterite expresses things that happened, like pasó. The present perfect is used to express things that have happened, like ha pasado. Most likely you will hear the present perfect when you're talking about things that happened very recently in the past. Like, this morning, I have eaten cereal. The present tense is the present tense. It describes things that happen. For example, pasa. The present progressive is a little bit more specific. It's describing something that's happening right now. Está pasando. Future describes things that will happen, like pasará. And future perfect describes things that will have happened. Habrá pasado. If you put all of these tenses together, you end up with the indicative. Of course, we know that there are more tenses than just the ones in the indicative. This is a timeline about the subjunctive. The very first object on the timeline is the pluperfect subjunctive, something that had happened that follows the conditions of the subjunctive. It's conjugated like this, hubiera pasado. So we have the verb haber in the imperfect subjunctive with a past participle. Then we have the imperfect subjunctive. That's used to express both preterite and imperfect in the subjunctive. Pasará is an example. Then we have the present perfect subjunctive. A present perfect subjunctive is commonly used to express things that have happened recently. And you conjugate it like this, haya pasado. It's the verb haber in the subjunctive with a past participle. Then we have present subjunctive, which is stuff that happens, and it's conjugated like pase. Then we have present progressive subjunctive. That's something that is happening right now, and it's conjugated like this, esté pasando. It's the verb estar with the gerund or ing. And then last but not least, we have the future. The future doesn't really exist in the subjunctive. We can talk about the future in the subjunctive, but we conjugate the verb as if it's in the present subjunctive, like pase. The last and shortest timeline is the conditional. There are only 3 pieces. The first is the conditional perfect, which expresses something that would have happened. The conjugation is like this, habría pasado. It's the verb haber in the conditional with the past participle. Then you have the conditional itself, which expresses things that would happen, like pasaría. And then last but not least, you have the progressive, which is something that would be happening, like estaría pasando. You don't hear it very often, but it is part of the timeline. The textbook that we're using this year divides all of the verb tenses in Spanish into 5 categories. The names of the categories are a number followed by a colon, which in Spanish is punto punto. So, number 1 is uno punto punto. Uno punto punto represents the presente, the present, which includes the present tense and the present progressive. That can be subjunctive or indicative. Dos punto punto es el pasado, the past, which can either be imperfect, preterite, or present perfect. Dos punto punto is only in the indicative. You can't have subjunctive or conditional. Tres punto punto es el futuro, which includes the future tense, the future perfect tense, and the present subjunctive, since, remember, there's no future subjunctive. Cuatro punto punto es el condicional, which represents the conditional, the present perfect subjunctive, and the imperfect subjunctive. The last one is número 5, el pasado imposible. There's only 2 possible tenses here, the conditional perfect or the pluperfect subjunctive. Number 5 is a little bit difficult to explain, so the best way I know how is to show you an example in English and in Spanish. Here's an example of a sentence in English with cinco punto punto. I would have gone to the movie if you had shared your popcorn. The reason why cinco punto punto is called the pasado imposible is because it's talking about events that never actually happened. I never actually went to the movie because you didn't share your popcorn. The part underlined in green, which I know is hard to see, would be conjugated in the conditional perfect, I would have gone. But the part underlined in black would be conjugated in the pluperfect subjunctive, if you had shared. Let's see what that sentence looks like in Spanish. Yo habría ido al cine si tú hubieras compartido las palomitas. You can see that habría ido is conjugated in the conditional perfect, and hubieras compartido is in the pluperfect subjunctive. It's possible to change a sentence from one time to another. For example, here's a sentence in uno punto punto. Mi gato se llama Carbón. It's in the present tense, but I could change this sentence to all the other forms. So let's change the sentence to dos punto punto el pasado. In dos punto punto, the sentence is mi gato se llamaba Carbón. Uno punto punto is talking about a cat in the present, while dos punto punto is talking about a cat in the past. Tres punto punto is in the future, so basically, if I get a cat, I will name him Carbón. Mi gato se llamará Carbón. Cuatro punto punto is the conditional, so the sentence goes, mi gato se llamaría Carbón. Like, if I had a cat, I would name him Carbón. And last but not least, we have cinco punto punto, el pasado imposible. It goes, mi gato se habría llamado Carbón. But el pasado imposible doesn't actually exist. So maybe I have a cat, but I decided to name him Fred. Cinco punto punto is saying that my cat would have been named Carbón, but either I didn't have a cat or I decided to name him something else. Those sentences were pretty easy, but it can get a little bit more complicated when you have more complex sentences. Here's one in uno punto punto. Si voy a España, pruebo las tortillas. Now we're going to try and change this sentence from uno punto punto to the other times. Here's what the sentence looks like in dos punto punto, el pasado, and tres punto punto, el futuro. In dos punto punto it's si iba a España, probaba las tortillas. En tres punto punto it's si voy a España, probaré las tortillas. You'll find out in a later video why the first verb is still in the present tense. Then we have cuatro punto punto, el condicional. Si fuera a España, probaría las tortillas. Fuera is conjugated in the imperfect subjunctive, and I'll explain in a later video why. And last but not least, we have el pasado imposible. Si hubiera ido a España, habría probado las tortillas. If I had gone to Spain, I would have tried the tortillas. But I didn't go to Spain, so I didn't try the tortillas.